Hook, this is for your growth, she would say, giving me the thick blue liquid. Yesterday, I found bottles in her room with dates 1999 to 2023. In medical reports, physical age, 12 years at chronological 25. I always trusted my aunt completely. After my parents died in that car accident when I was 7, she became everything to me: mother, father, protector, the only family I had left. She moved into our old house, took care of all the paperwork, and promised she'd never leave me alone. The blue bottle appeared about a month after she moved in. Every morning at exactly 8 a.m., she'd pour the thick, syrupy liquid into a small glass and watch me drink it. The taste was awful, like medicine mixed with artificial blueberry flavor that couldn't quite hide the bitter undertone. When I'd scrunch up my face, she'd stroke my hair and remind me it was for my own good. "This will help you grow strong and healthy," she'd say with that gentle smile I'd grown to depend on. "Your body needs extra help after everything you've been through." I never questioned it. Why would I? She was the adult, the one with the medical knowledge who worked those long hours at some research facility downtown. She knew what was best for me. Years passed, and I started noticing things that didn't quite add up. While other kids my age were hitting growth spurts, getting acne, their voices changing, I remained exactly the same. At 12, I looked like I was still 8. At 15, people mistook me for 10. My aunt would brush off my concerns, telling me I was just a late bloomer, that some people developed slower than others. "Look at me," she'd say, gesturing to her own petite frame. I was always small for my age, too. You get it from my side of the family. But it wasn't just my size. My energy levels were different from other kids. While they'd get tired after running around, I could go for hours without feeling winded. My memory was sharper than it should have been. I could recall conversations from years ago with perfect clarity. Sometimes I'd catch my aunt watching me with this strange expression, like she was studying me, taking mental notes. School became increasingly difficult as the years went on. Teachers would look at me strangely when they saw my age on paper versus how I appeared. Other kids either treated me like their little sister or avoided me entirely because something felt off. I had to switch schools 3 times because my aunt said the environments weren't suitable for my development. The homeschooling started when I turned 18 chronologically but still looked 12 physically. My aunt convinced the authorities that I had a rare medical condition that required specialized education. She showed them official-looking documents with big medical terms I didn't understand. They seemed satisfied with her explanations and left us alone. That's when the real isolation began. No more interaction with kids my age, no more questions about why I looked so young. Just me, my aunt, and our daily routine that revolved around that blue bottle. She'd increased the dosage over the years. What started as a small sip became a full glass I had to finish completely. "You're responding so well to the treatment," she'd tell me, checking something off on a clipboard she kept hidden in her room. "We just need to maintain consistency." I started having dreams around my 20th birthday, vivid, terrifying dreams about being trapped in a small room with white walls, watching other children through glass windows. They all looked like me, small and young, but their eyes held an ancient sadness that made me wake up crying. My aunt would find me in the morning, still shaking, and she'd hold me close. "Just nightmares, sweetheart. Your mind is processing all the stress from your unique situation. That's why we need to keep up with your medicine." But the dreams became more frequent, more detailed. I started seeing faces I somehow recognized, hearing voices calling my name from behind those glass walls. Sometimes I'd wake up with the taste of that blue liquid already in my mouth, like I'd been drinking it in my sleep. Last week, something changed in my aunt's behavior. She became more anxious, checking her phone constantly, making hushed phone calls late at night. I'd catch fragments of conversations through my bedroom wall, words like specimen, deterioration, and timeline accelerating. When I'd ask if everything was okay, she'd force that same gentle smile and tell me not to worry about adult problems. The breaking point came 3 days ago. I woke up in the middle of the night feeling incredibly thirsty, something that had been happening more often lately. As I crept toward the kitchen for water, I heard my aunt's voice coming from her home office, the room she always kept locked. "The subject is showing signs of resistance to the compound. Physical markers are becoming less stable. We may need to consider termination protocols if the degradation continues." My blood ran cold. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. 24 years is unprecedented for this type of experiment. The cellular manipulation has exceeded all projections, but the psychological strain on the subject is beginning to manifest in ways that could compromise the entire project. I stumbled back to my room, my mind reeling. Subject? Experiment? Termination protocols? None of it made sense, but the fear in my chest told me I needed to find answers. Yesterday morning, my aunt left earlier than usual for work. She seemed distracted, forgetting to give me my morning dose of the blue liquid for the first time in years. The moment her car disappeared down the street, I knew I had to search her office. The door was locked, but I remembered watching her punch in the code on the electronic keypad. My birthday, the day my parents died. My hands shook as I entered the numbers. What I found inside that room shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. Update 1. The office was like something out of a science fiction movie. Multiple monitors displayed graphs and charts with my name at the top. File cabinets lined the walls, each drawer labeled with dates going back to 1999. But it was the wall of photographs that made my legs give out. Dozens of pictures of me over the years, but they weren't normal family photos. These were clinical shots, front view, side view, measuring height and weight. Medical equipment I'd never seen before appeared in many of them. In some pictures, I was unconscious on what looked like an examination table. But the worst part was finding photos of other children who looked exactly like me. Same build, same facial structure, same unnaturally youthful appearance. Each photo was labeled with a number and the word terminated stamped in red across most of them. I found the medical reports next. Page after page of data about something called Project Eternal Youth, a government-funded research program designed to halt the aging process in human subjects. My aunt wasn't just a researcher in this project. According to these documents, she was the lead scientist. The reports detailed how they tried the experimental compound on hundreds of children over the decades, mostly orphans who wouldn't be missed. Most subjects died within months from organ failure or cellular breakdown. Others aged rapidly and died of old age within weeks. Only a handful lasted longer than a year. Then I found my file, the thickest folder in the entire cabinet. Subject 847, acquired at age 7 following convenient elimination of parental units. Initial compound administration began 30 days post-acquisition. Subject shows remarkable adaptation to cellular manipulation protocols. Convenient elimination. They killed my parents. The car accident wasn't random. It was planned to get me into my aunt's custody. I kept reading, even though every word felt like a knife twisting in my chest. The reports documented every aspect of my life for the past 18 years. Every conversation I'd had with my aunt had been recorded and analyzed. Every physical change, every emotional response, every dream I'd told her about was cataloged in clinical detail. Subject 847 demonstrates unprecedented stability in cellular age suspension. Physical development has remained consistent at approximately 8 to 9 years despite chronological age of 25. Cognitive function appears enhanced, possibly due to extended neuroplasticity retention. Subject shows signs of subconscious memory retention of pre-acquisition trauma, manifesting in recurring nightmares about other test subjects. The dreams weren't dreams at all. They were memories from when I was younger, from before my aunt perfected her methods of keeping me compliant and unaware. But the most horrifying discovery was a video file labeled Facility Tour, Batch 840 to 850. I clicked on it with trembling hands. The footage showed an underground laboratory filled with small cells, each containing a child who looked to be around my physical age. They were all sitting quietly, staring at nothing, their eyes empty and lifeless. A voice I recognized as my aunt's provided narration as the camera moved from cell to cell. Subjects 840 through 846 have shown signs of psychological breakdown despite maintained physical suspension. Cognitive deterioration appears to be an unavoidable side effect of prolonged treatment. Recommendation for termination approved. The camera continued moving, showing me the faces of children who could have been my siblings. Then it stopped at the last cell, where a girl sat reading a book, looking alert and engaged with her surroundings. Subject 847 continues to show remarkable psychological resilience. This specimen has maintained cognitive function and emotional stability far beyond any previous test case. Recommend continuation of current protocols and relocation to controlled home environment for long-term observation. That girl in the cell was me. The book I was reading was one I remembered loving as a child, before my parents died. This video was from right after my aunt took custody of me, when she was still keeping me in that underground facility. I don't know how long I sat there staring at that screen, watching my younger self in that horrible place. But eventually, I heard my aunt's car pulling into the driveway. I quickly shut down the computer, locked the office door, and ran back to my room, my mind spinning with the weight of what I discovered. When she called me for lunch, I couldn't look at her face. This woman who had raised me, who I'd loved and trusted completely, had been using me as a lab rat my entire life. Every kindness, every gentle touch, every word of comfort had been part of her research protocol. "You seem quiet today," she said, studying my face with those calculating eyes I was only now beginning to recognize. "Are you feeling all right? You didn't take your morning vitamins." I forced myself to nod and mumble something about being tired. She watched me for a long moment, then went to the kitchen and returned with a full glass of the blue liquid. "We can't skip doses," she said firmly. "Your body depends on maintaining consistent levels." For the first time in my life, I hesitated before taking the glass. That hesitation was enough. I saw something shift in her expression, a coldness that had always been there but hidden beneath her caring facade. "Drink it," she said, and her voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. I drank it, but as the familiar bitter taste filled my mouth, all I could think about were those other children in the video and how many of them had drunk this same poison before they were terminated. That night, I lay in bed planning my escape. But where could I go? I looked like a child but had no identification that would convince anyone I was actually 25. I had no money, no friends, no family except the woman who had been experimenting on me my entire life. Worse, I was starting to feel strange. My body ached in ways it never had before, and I kept having dizzy spells. I wondered if missing that morning dose had started some kind of withdrawal process, or if my aunt had changed the compound somehow. I must have fallen asleep because I woke up to find my aunt standing beside my bed in the darkness, holding a syringe. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and for just a moment, she almost sounded like she meant it. "But you're too valuable to lose." Update 2. I pretended to still be asleep while my aunt prepared the injection. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure she could hear it, but years of watching her work had taught me that she always took her time with medical procedures. She was meticulous, checking and double-checking everything. That meticulousness saved my life. While she was adjusting the dosage on the syringe, I rolled off the bed and ran for the door. She lunged after me, but I was faster. One advantage of being trapped in a child's body was that I could move quickly when I needed to. I made it to the front door before realizing I had nowhere to go. It was 3 in the morning. I looked like a 12-year-old in pajamas, and I had no money or identification. But staying wasn't an option anymore. I could hear my aunt moving through the house, probably getting more sedatives or worse. I ran to the neighbor's house and started pounding on the door. Mr. Peterson had always been kind to me, and he'd known my parents before they died. If anyone would help me, it would be him. When he opened the door and saw me standing there crying and shaking, he immediately pulled me inside. I tried to explain what was happening, but it sounded insane even to me. A woman who pretended to be my aunt had been keeping me as a test subject for an illegal aging experiment? Who would believe that? But Mr. Peterson surprised me. Instead of dismissing my story, he listened carefully and asked specific questions. When I mentioned the underground facility and the other children, his face went pale. "I need to make some phone calls," he said quietly. "Stay here and don't answer the door for anyone." It turned out Mr. Peterson wasn't just a retired neighbor. He was former FBI, and he'd been suspicious of my aunt for years. He'd noticed things that didn't add up, how I never seemed to age, how she'd moved in so quickly after my parents' death, how she worked for a company that didn't seem to officially exist. I tried to investigate once, but she had documentation for everything. Medical records showing you had a rare genetic condition, court papers showing she was your legal guardian, even your birth certificate showing you were younger than you actually were. She'd covered every angle. While we waited for his contacts to arrive, Mr. Peterson helped me search through some boxes he'd kept from my parents' house, things my aunt had told him to throw away but he'd saved just in case. That's where we found the real bombshell. Hidden in my mother's jewelry box was a letter addressed to me, dated just weeks before my parents died. "My dearest daughter," it began, "if you're reading this, then something has happened to your father and me, and you're probably in terrible danger. Your aunt contacted us months ago with an offer that seemed too good to be true, money to pay off our debts in exchange for letting her conduct some harmless medical research on you. We refused, but she became increasingly aggressive in her attempts to convince us. We've decided to take you and leave town, but if we don't make it, you need to know the truth about who you really are and why she wants you so badly." The letter went on to explain that I wasn't just any random child my aunt had chosen for her experiments. I was specifically selected because of my unique genetic markers, a rare combination that made me the perfect candidate for her research. My parents had discovered this when they'd taken me for genetic testing as a baby, trying to understand why I'd developed certain abilities earlier than other children. You've always been special, my mother had written. Your memory, your physical coordination, your resistance to illness, these aren't normal traits. We had you tested when you were 3 because doctors kept commenting on how advanced you were. The results showed genetic markers that occur in less than 1 in 10 million people. We kept this secret to protect you, but somehow your aunt found out. The letter included copies of my real genetic testing results and my actual birth certificate. I wasn't 25 like I'd thought. I was actually 28. My aunt had been dosing me for even longer than I'd realized, and she'd falsified records to make me think I was younger than I actually was. But the most shocking revelation was in the final paragraph of the letter. Your aunt isn't really your aunt. She's a scientist who has been searching for someone with your genetic profile for decades. She arranged for us to meet her through a fake family genealogy service, claiming to be a long-lost relative who wanted to reconnect with family. Everything about her relationship to us was manufactured to get close to you. Before I could fully process this information, we heard cars pulling up outside. Mr. Peterson looked out the window and swore under his breath. "That's not my contacts," he said. "That's your aunt, and she's not alone." Through the window, I could see several black SUVs parked in front of the house. Men in dark suits were getting out, along with my aunt who was gesturing angrily toward Mr. Peterson's front door. She must have tracking devices in your clothes or body, Mr. Peterson realized. They found you too quickly. We had maybe minutes before they reached the house. Mr. Peterson grabbed a bag he kept prepared for emergencies and hustled me toward his back door. "There's a tunnel that connects to the old storm drainage system," he explained as we ran through his backyard. "It comes out near the highway. My contacts are waiting there with a safe house." But as we reached the tunnel entrance, I heard the sound that made my blood freeze. Dogs barking. They brought tracking dogs, which meant even if we made it through the tunnel, they'd be able to follow our scent. That's when Mr. Peterson made a decision that probably saved my life but cost him everything. He handed me the bag and pushed me toward the tunnel entrance. "Go," he said firmly. "Follow the tunnel straight for about half a mile. When you see daylight, climb up and look for a blue sedan with Maryland plates. Tell them Peterson sent you and show them the documents from your parents." "What about you?" I asked, but I already knew the answer from his expression. "I'm going to buy you time," he said. "And I'm going to make sure they know that people are watching, that this isn't going to stay secret anymore." I wanted to argue, but the sound of the dogs was getting closer. I took the bag and crawled into the tunnel, looking back once to see Mr. Peterson walking calmly toward his house, his hands visible and empty. The tunnel was narrow, dark, and filled with the sound of my own panicked breathing. I crawled for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, following the faint light that grew stronger as I moved forward. When I finally emerged, I was covered in mud and shaking uncontrollably. But there it was, a blue sedan with Maryland plates parked exactly where Mr. Peterson had said it would be. The woman who got out of the car looked like she could be someone's grandmother, but her eyes were sharp and alert. She took one look at me and the documents I was clutching and nodded. "You're Peterson's package," she said matter-of-factly. "Get in. We have about a 10-minute head start before they figure out where that tunnel leads." As we drove away, I could see smoke rising from the direction of Mr. Peterson's house. I never found out exactly what happened to him, but the woman, who told me to call her Martha, said he'd known the risks when he decided to help me. "Peterson's been tracking your aunt's organization for 15 years, Martha explained as we drove toward what she called a safe location. He wasn't the only one. There's a whole network of people who've been trying to expose this program, but they're very good at covering their tracks and eliminating threats." The safe house turned out to be a medical facility run by doctors who specialized in treating victims of illegal human experimentation. It was there that I learned the full scope of what had been done to me, and more importantly, what I could do about it. Update 3. The medical evaluation at the safe house revealed the true extent of the damage done to my body over 21 years of forced medication. Dr. Sarah Chin, the physician who examined me, had worked with other survivors of similar experiments, though none had been subjected to treatment for as long as I had. "Your cellular structure has been artificially maintained at a pre-adolescent state," she explained, showing me scans of my bones, organs, and tissue samples. "But the compound wasn't just preventing aging, it was also suppressing your natural hormone production and keeping your neural pathways from developing normally. In essence, they've kept you in a state of suspended biological development." The good news was that the effects weren't permanent. The bad news was that stopping the treatment abruptly could cause serious complications as my body tried to catch up on decades of missed biological processes. We're going to have to carefully manage your transition back to normal development, Dr. Chen said. Your body will likely go through a compressed version of puberty and early adulthood all at once. It's going to be physically and emotionally challenging. But first, Martha and her team needed to understand exactly what they were dealing with. The documents I'd taken from my aunt's office were just the tip of the iceberg. Using the information I'd provided, they'd been conducting raids on facilities connected to the project across the country. What they found was horrifying, but also gave me hope that other survivors might still be alive. Project Eternal Youth was much larger than we initially suspected, Martha told me during one of our daily briefings. We've identified at least 12 facilities in 8 states, all conducting variations of the same experiments. Your aunt's operation was the most successful, which is why you survived when so many others didn't. They'd found records indicating that over 3,000 children had been subjected to various forms of the treatment over the past 30 years. Most had died within the first year, but they'd identified nearly 50 subjects who had survived longer than 5 years. The problem is that most of the longer-term survivors are in facilities that are much more secure than your aunt's home operation, Martha explained. She'd gotten cocky, thinking that keeping you isolated and compliant was enough. The others are held in underground bunkers with military-level security. But they'd also discovered something my aunt probably didn't know. The project had been shut down by the government 2 years earlier when a whistleblower had leaked some of the preliminary findings to international human rights organizations. The facilities that were still operating were doing so illegally, using stolen research and leftover supplies. Your aunt and the others running these rogue operations are essentially conducting black market experiments with no oversight whatsoever, Martha said. Which means they're even more dangerous now because they have nothing to lose. This explained why my aunt had seemed more anxious lately and why she'd been making those phone calls about termination protocols. The walls were closing in on her operation, and I was the evidence that could expose everything. Over the next few weeks, my body began the process of catching up on decades of suppressed development. Dr. Chen had warned me it would be difficult, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of experiencing 20 years of physical changes in a matter of months. My bones ached constantly as they grew and strengthened. My height increased by nearly 8 inches in 6 weeks. My voice changed, my facial features matured, and I experienced every awkward physical milestone of adolescence compressed into an incredibly short time frame. But the emotional changes were even more challenging. As my brain chemistry normalized and my suppressed hormones kicked in, I experienced waves of anger, grief, and confusion that were almost overwhelming. I mourned for the childhood I'd never had, for the young woman I should have been, for all the experiences and relationships that had been stolen from me. Dr. Chen connected me with other survivors who had been rescued from similar situations. Talking to them helped me understand that what I was feeling was normal, given the circumstances. They'd all gone through their own version of accelerated development and psychological adjustment. But I also learned something that gave me a new sense of purpose. Many of the survivors were working with Martha's organization to locate and rescue other victims. My unique experience, having been free-roaming rather than confined to a facility, gave me insights that could help them develop better rescue strategies. You understand the psychological manipulation tactics better than anyone, Martha explained when she asked if I wanted to join their efforts. Most of the survivors we found were kept in isolation cells and treated as obvious prisoners. But you were made to believe your captor cared about you, that the treatment was for your own good. That's a much more complex form of psychological control. I agreed to help, partly because I wanted to prevent other children from going through what I had experienced, but mostly because I learned something during my research in my aunt's office that I hadn't told anyone yet. The video I'd found wasn't the only recording she'd made. Hidden in the computer files were dozens of video calls between my aunt and other researchers, including recent conversations about their most successful specimens. In these conversations, they mentioned specific facilities where long-term survivors were being held, and they discussed plans for expanding their operations using me as a template for perfecting their techniques. But most importantly, I'd seen a list of names, children who were scheduled to be acquired for new experiments. The list included birth dates, addresses, and detailed information about their families. These were real children living normal lives who had no idea they were being watched and evaluated for potential kidnapping. I knew I couldn't keep this information to myself, but I also knew that sharing it would put me at even greater risk. My aunt and her colleagues would do anything to prevent this information from reaching law enforcement. Martha's team moved quickly once I provided them with the details. Within 48 hours, they coordinated with FBI agents and international law enforcement to conduct simultaneous raids on all the facilities mentioned in my aunt's files. The operation was more successful than anyone had dared to hope. They rescued 37 children and teenagers who were being held in various facilities, and they arrested over 60 people involved in the illegal research program. But my aunt wasn't among those arrested. She'd vanished from her house shortly after the night I escaped, taking with her all the remaining research materials and compounds. Martha's team suspected she'd fled to a country without extradition treaties, where she could continue her work without interference. She's probably trying to set up new operations somewhere else, Martha told me. People like her don't just give up when one project fails. They take what they've learned and start over. This knowledge haunted me, but it also strengthened my resolve to help other survivors and prevent future victims. Over the following months, as my body completed its transition to normal adult development, I worked with Martha's organization to develop protocols for identifying and helping other survivors. We created support groups for people adjusting to normal development after years of artificial age suppression. We worked with medical professionals to better understand the long-term health effects of the various compounds that had been used. Most importantly, we helped survivors reconnect with family members they'd been separated from, or find new support systems when their original families were no longer alive. But there was still one thing I needed to do for my own peace of mind. Final update. 6 months after my rescue, I made a decision that everyone advised against. I wanted to visit my parents' grave for the first time since their funeral. Martha tried to talk me out of it, pointing out that my aunt might be monitoring locations that were significant to me. Dr. Chen worried that the emotional stress might interfere with my ongoing physical and psychological recovery. But I needed closure, and I needed to tell my parents that I'd finally learned the truth about what happened to them. The cemetery was exactly as I remembered it from that horrible day 21 years earlier, except now I was seeing it through adult eyes instead of those of a traumatized 7-year-old. Martha's security team stayed at a distance, but close enough to intervene if anything went wrong. Standing at my parents' headstone, I finally understood the magnitude of what had been taken from all of us. Not just my childhood and adolescence, but my parents' lives and my opportunity to grow up knowing I was loved for who I was rather than what I could provide to someone's research. I told them about everything I'd discovered, about the other children who had been saved, about my plans to continue working to expose these kinds of operations. I promised them that their deaths wouldn't be meaningless, that the information they'd hidden had ultimately helped bring down the people responsible. But as I was preparing to leave, I noticed someone watching me from across the cemetery. At first, I thought it was one of Martha's security team, but something about the figure's posture seemed familiar. My aunt had come back. She was standing about 50 yards away, next to a large memorial monument that provided good cover. Even from that distance, I could see she looked different, thinner, more haggard, like someone who'd been living under constant stress. I should have signaled for help immediately, but instead I found myself walking toward her. After everything that had happened, I needed to face her directly, to ask the questions that had been eating at me for months. She didn't try to run or hide when she realized I'd seen her. Instead, she stood there waiting as I approached, her hands visible and empty. "You look good," she said when I got close enough to hear her speak. "Healthy. More like your mother than I expected." "Don't," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Don't talk about my mother. You killed her." "I never wanted that to happen," she replied, and for just a moment she sounded like the woman who had raised me. "Your parents were supposed to agree to the arrangement. The accident was only meant to happen if they tried to run. But you did it anyway. You murdered them and kidnapped me." She was quiet for a long moment, looking at my parents' headstone. I told myself it was for the greater good, that the research we were doing could eventually help millions of people, that sacrificing a few lives to potentially extend human lifespan indefinitely was worth it. "And now I know I was wrong about a lot of things," she said, "but not about you. You were extraordinary, even before the treatment. The compound didn't create your abilities, it just preserved them at a time when they were most pronounced." I realized she was talking about the enhanced memory, coordination, and other traits my parents had mentioned in their letter. Things I'd always thought were side effects of her experiments. "That's why you chose me specifically," I said, understanding finally clicking into place. "It wasn't random. There are maybe a dozen people in the world with your genetic profile," she confirmed. "Most of them are adults who have already gone through normal development. You were the only child young enough for the treatment to work on. What happened to the others? The ones with similar genetics?" Her expression darkened. Some chose to participate voluntarily in exchange for money. Others declined our offers and had to be convinced through other means. I felt sick thinking about what other means might have involved. "Why are you here?" I asked. "Why risk coming back?" "Because I wanted to see what you'd become," she said. "And because I wanted to offer you something." She reached slowly into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small blue bottle, the same type I'd seen thousands of times over the years. "This is the refined compound," she said. "Completely perfected based on 21 years of data from your treatment. One dose would halt your aging process permanently at your current age. You'd never get sick, never grow old, never die of natural causes. You could live for centuries, maybe longer." I stared at the bottle, remembering all those mornings when she'd forced me to drink the bitter liquid, all those years when I'd trusted her completely. "Why would you think I'd want that?" "Because everyone wants more time," she said simply. "Everyone wants to cheat death. I'm offering you true immortality." "At what cost? More experiments? More dead children?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "The research is complete. You were the final test subject we needed. The compound is perfected now. Then why aren't you taking it yourself?" She smiled sadly. "I am. I've been taking a version of it for 15 years. But it only works if you start before age 35. After that, the cellular damage from normal aging interferes with the process." I looked at her more carefully and realized she was right. Despite the stress and exhaustion in her face, she didn't look like she'd aged at all since I was a child. "I'm offering you a choice I never gave you before," she continued. "You can take this and live forever, or you can walk away and live a normal human lifespan. But either way, you'll never see me again." I thought about all the survivors we'd rescued, all the families that had been destroyed by her research, all the children who had died in those underground facilities. "What about justice?" I asked. "What about facing consequences for what you've done?" "Justice is a luxury for people who have normal lifespans," she said. "I have eternity to live with what I've done. That's punishment enough." I looked at the blue bottle in her hand, then at my parents' headstone, then back at her face. "I don't want to live forever," I said finally. "I want to live like a normal person, with normal relationships and normal experiences. I want to grow old with someone I love and have children and watch them grow up. I want all the things you stole from me." She nodded like she'd expected this answer. "I thought you might say that." But I had to offer. She set the bottle down on a nearby bench and stepped back. "In case you change your mind," she said. "It will remain stable for years if kept cool and dark." Then she turned and walked away, disappearing behind the memorial monument. By the time Martha's security team reached me, she was gone. I picked up the bottle and looked at it for a long time. Such a small thing to contain such enormous power and terrible history. Part of me was curious about what it would feel like to know I'd never age, never die. But a bigger part of me was relieved to finally have the choice. I walked back to my parents' grave and told them about the conversation, about the decision I'd made. Then I opened the bottle and poured the blue liquid onto the ground above their casket. "This is for all the children who never got to choose," I said. "And for all the ones who will grow up normal because these experiments are finally over." Martha found me there an hour later, sitting quietly by the headstone. She didn't ask what had happened to the bottle, but I could tell she understood when she saw the blue stain on the ground. "Ready to go home?" she asked. Home. For the first time in my life, I knew what that word really meant. Not a place where I was kept safe for someone else's purposes, but a place where I belonged, where I was valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. "Yeah," I said, getting up and brushing dirt off my clothes. "I'm ready." I never saw my aunt again after that day. Sometimes I wonder if she's still out there somewhere, living her extended life and trying to justify what she did. But mostly I try not to think about her at all. Instead, I focus on the life I'm building. I'm 28 years old now, chronologically and physically. I'm in college, studying to become a counselor, so I